Welcome everybody to Module 4 of Taking the First Steps. This is Organizing Your Movement. Just as a reminder for those of you that may be just joining us for this video, we're a group of racialized progressives with various political campaign experiences coming together to bridge gaps of knowledge so that more Canadians feel comfortable in seeking a political nomination. At the end of the day, these videos will be released as free content available to anybody regardless of race, income, location, or partisan ideology. So this is Module 4 of an 8-module series. And joining us today is Asma Bala. She is a lawyer, political strategist, and campaign manager. She has served as the co-chair for Mitzi Hunter's Ontario Liberal Leadership Campaign in 2019. She is a real property and planning lawyer. She has a BA in International Studies and a MA in Religion, as well as her Juris Doctorate. And she served as a senior advisor to Ontario's Minister of Economic Development, Trade and Employment, focusing on trade policy and legislative affairs. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Today we'll be talking about two macro themes: the campaign team and volunteers and supporters. And some just basic details that you need to know for both when you're starting off thinking about putting together your team for a nomination. So from the get-go, everything kind of revolves around the candidate, but the macro team requires an understanding that there's people play different roles within your community, and everybody has different experiences and level of commitment that they can provide. And this will filter into the role that they play on your team, whether it's campaign team leader, neighborhood team leader, team member, or specialist coordinators that focus on the personnel, data, commit to vote, etc. Do you have any kind of specific remarks that you'd like to provide based on your own experiences with larger campaigns and individual ones?
So yes, I think just on this slide here, I would also have a role for someone who's dedicated to fundraising, because finances coming into a campaign are just as crucial to the health and the longevity of any campaign. So I think these roles are very important, but I think there should always be a dedicated person whose sole job is to worry about fundraising.
So keeping that in mind, so some of the macro ones that leadership positions that we're talking about are campaign team leader, who's responsible for the organizing of team members, structuring team meetings, creating agendas, communicating goals, and holding team members accountable. They're really kind of at the top and that liaison between yourself as the candidate seeking a nomination and the rest of the team. There's also individuals such as the volunteer coordinator, who welcomes and trains new volunteers, communicates roles and responsibilities to help identify and organize new voters and volunteers, and maintains that relationship between the team leader and the volunteers. For a data coordinator, you'll have somebody that manages all the data for the team, including volunteer sign-up data, and they're also responsible for data entry, creating call lists for team activities and consolidating reports on the results of all activities, as well as a commit to vote coordinator who will be responsible for organizing all team commit to vote sign-up activities, including tabling, training, and coaching volunteers. And studies have shown that commit to vote pledges increase youth voter turnout by 10 to 14%. As well as in addition, on this, we should have a fundraising coordinator. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I think there's two things that I would say if you're looking at putting together an ideal campaign team. I think the other one to add is to have a dedicated person who's responsible for the get out the vote effort. So this is the election day chair or whatever that sort of person or the role for somebody to be dedicated to pulling the vote. So identifying the vote is just as important, but getting people to the ballot box on voting day is very, very, very crucial. And so you have a commit to vote coordinator, you have different coordinators who are focused on different things. It's always good to pass off this huge responsibility and make one person be dedicated to it. The other role that I would say be important, and it's more so important when you're looking at an actual voting day, is having somebody who would act as sort of your legal expertise on the day of. And so if you're going into a provincial or a federal or a municipal election, A lot of times there are issues that happen at, voting locations, and it's always good for someone to be dedicated to knowing what the rules are, knowing what's not okay, and having a dedicated person who your volunteers can call and say, hey, something doesn't look good here, something looks a little wrong. Am I right? Is this, my spidey senses are going off. Is this something that needs to be escalated? And so the role of the legal advisor is typically to say, yes, that's something that needs to be escalated, needs to be picked up with whatever the elections authority would be that Elections Canada or Elections Ontario.
Another important aspect of the campaign team is really making sure that you're effectively onboarding your team, that you're respecting time commitments, and that you're looking at all sorts of experience that your campaign team can bring. So when we talk about onboarding, is really getting your supporters incorporated into the team, getting them involved with the team. So this can look at something like a social event where the team makes those kind of connections, build those relationships, some kind of icebreaker activities, even something as simple as a pizza party, for example, is a great way to get the team really introduced together and started. Other things that you have to do is you have to invite, confirm, and track the status of all your contacts to make sure that they're not only still engaged in that part of it, but it's also really a key pillar to a strong strategy development project and aspect of it. So make sure you're asking people about when they're available and trying to get some kind of a firm commitment from them, not just saying, I'm not going to, or I'm going to volunteer eventually, but try to ask them, can you volunteer this Saturday or this Sunday or whatever it may be? And that usually does help try to get you there. Try and track personal networks. Try to see whether or not somebody who's a part of a local community group or faith group can try to connect you with that group to be an entry into that group and try to build networks from there. And also importantly, asking people about their previous experience and trying to build on that. So some people might be, great caterers, for example, and you can try to help them to get you, or you can get their help in that way. Or some people are great at social media or marketing. So trying to leverage whatever experience that people have does not always have to be politically related. Asma, do you want to add anything there? Or?
Yeah, I mean, you made a really good point. I think communication is sort of the one thing that I think is the most important on campaigns. I think a lot of times campaigns have issues when expectations aren't clearly communicated, or for whatever reason, communication gaps happen, and that's where you start to have these sort of more difficult kind of environments that come about. And the other thing that I would also say is very important is just investing in group activities to build build cohesion amongst the team. I mean, a lot of times campaigns come together, people don't maybe know each other beforehand or don't have experience working with each other. And sometimes just doing things like having a dedicated night during the week where you guys all sort of do dinner together, maybe, to get to know each other a little bit better. All of these things help. And they work to build a stronger team, and it creates cohesion.
Absolutely. And all this really does feed into having a successful team that's able to meet those metrics, to meet those goals of any campaign. I think we've all been a part of successful campaigns, and we can see the vibrancy that's created from those really earnest onboarding initiatives and whatnot. Another thing you have to consider is for any type of volunteer social, you want to make sure that it's keeping it fun, light, something interactive. Restaurants or pubs are always a great idea. Try to connect with people a few days before the event to confirm their attendance, and also just to remind them that constant contact is key to ensuring that people remember both you and your event. And also make sure to check mark them down for another event and try to confirm their ongoing support and involvement. Break events into 3 phases: the initial planning, the recruitment, and the execution. Any event should be composed of some kind of registration or introduction, an icebreaker, the candidate talk, and a discussion Q&A, and obviously a conclusion, asking people to be involved in some kind of specific campaign event or campaign task. So whether it's volunteer recruitment or community event, whatever it may be. So this is a typical structure of what some of these events might look like. Here's just a sample a tracking sheet, a sign-in sheet of making sure that you're kind of keeping in touch with people, making sure that you're ensuring that they're still interested. Again, it's very easy to forget. It's very easy if someone calls you once and says, "Can you come out 2 months from now?" and you don't hear anything until then, and then the weekend or the day before they're going to call you. That doesn't really work out well. So it's always good to keep constant communication. Against, you don't want to overdo it, but some kind of constant communication as you go and as you get closer to the date is important. So for building grassroots teams, you want to look at having local teams that reach out to their neighborhood and community organizations. Each community team will have a neighborhood team leader and multiple team members that will help knock doors, sign up supporters, and get out to vote on nomination day. This actually works very well intuitively. People from that neighborhood can give you a lot more guidance about that neighborhood, perhaps just generally understand their neighbors. And for buildings, this is a great thing because they might know when is the best time to knock doors or how to get into the building and whatnot, right? So leaning on your neighborhood team leaders and your neighborhood teams will be a very effective way to not only sign up voters, but also to get supporters. Neighborhood teams are built on recruiting, training, and empowering volunteers in your neighborhood or in your riding to step up and become leaders in your nomination campaign. They can help stage satellite efforts out of a central location, that could be someone's house or the campaign office, in that neighborhood to reflect or construct of a larger campaign team structure as get out to vote efforts become critical for nomination day. Asma, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's really important when you talk about having community or neighborhood team leaders because there's different issues. Even if you're in one riding and this is for a nomination or an election, there's different issues that kind of impact different neighborhoods. And the best people to speak to about that would be somebody from that neighborhood. And they can give you sort of insight that you'll otherwise never get. You're not going to be able to sort of Google all the issues in a specific riding. And so it's always important to ask every neighborhood team leader you have, what are the issues that are kind of dominating your neighbors' minds, or what's the discussion that's happening in your building? And it might be something that's connected to other things that are happening around, in other parts of the city, or the province, or in the country, or it might be something really specific. But you, as a candidate, want to know all of these things. You want to be educated about the things that are, worrying constituents.
Absolutely. Just having the ear on the ground can make all the difference in making sure that you're able to get ahead in a nomination race there. So tips for taking care of your teams. A typical canvas, such as door knocking or literature drops, can last anywhere from 1 to 3 hours and is done in groups of 2 to 5. It's important to ensure that your canvassers have more than enough material to last them throughout the whole canvas. Making sure that people have comfortable shoes and clothing on, layers if it is a cold season, but also things like hats, sunscreen, all the things that make any type of seasonal, walk or run or campaign effective. Literature, taking more than you need just in case you run out or in case you see extra people on the street and you'd like to pass it out. Smartphones with whichever app you use, such as Nation Builder, installed, or a clipboard walk list for input later. And finally, snacks and water for your volunteers, very important. Asma, any general tips?
Yeah, I think you'll always get people who are new to politics who might be interested in helping. So I've always found the best rule of thumb is to always put somebody who's new to canvassing with somebody who's done it several times before and let them go out on a canvas. And I think you kind of have the best teams built that way because the person who's new has somebody there who's experienced and has the confidence of knowing that if anything, if somebody asks me a question or there's something weird, I have somebody there. And for the person who's done this, or the veteran, they have an opportunity to mentor and sort of pass on their experience and their knowledge. So it's always a nice pairing.
Absolutely. And that kind of passion will always flow through.
For sure.
So getting a bit more into the coordinating of your volunteers and your supporters. There's different tools that you can use. Social media such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, etc., can not just help with the outreach or coordinating an event to share, but also to share on stories of locations and showing that community interaction and having those conversations. Face-to-face communication. So there's canvassing, table at community events, talking to local groups, phone calls, etc. there's still an element that need of some people looking for that face-to-face connection, as opposed to just a random reach out on Instagram or Facebook. And it helps build that individual relationship that you're trying to establish leading forward to nomination day and representing a community at large. Contacting can be email, but always follow up your email with a more intimate means of communication. So a follow-up could be texting, a Facebook message, or a direct call. Using apps such as Nation Builder, you can send out an email blast or a text as an initial reach out to promote an event. You can also create a Facebook event to share the RSVP link. And you can also use tools like Nation Builder to help coordinate your volunteer lists, commitments, and engage supporters.
I think on this one, just social media and sort of staying in contact with supporters is kind of overwhelming if you're a candidate. And so it's always good to make sure you have that expertise on your team, because things like Nation Builder or other apps, or even just Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, it's overwhelming for one person to try to do everything. So I think this is one area where I myself would say this would be very overwhelming, and it's always good to sort of bring people in to help.
And so just to build on that of bringing in people, you need to check in with your teams frequently to review strategies, ideas, and shuffling roles within the team to reflect people's strengths and weaknesses. They may come to you and say, hey, I have all this experience, or I'm passion driven and I want to be your social media coordinator. But reviewing kind of what's gone on, or what they may lack in knowledge or ability, or time, may result in you needing to review with your team a shuffle in responsibilities and roles, as well as potentially a need to bring in more people to help offload the weight of that. You need to listen to every voice and opinion. Don't just rely on the experienced veterans or loud personalities. There's quite a few people that come to the table that haven't done 10 or 20 campaigns, but they have equally insightful opinions about changing strategies or ways things should be done. Team cohesion. Make sure your volunteers feel part of the team, and throwing in those kind of mix of events, as well as conversations at the campaign office and anything else, helps build that cohesion. Debrief. So ask how calls went with your volunteers and supporters, and if any issues came up that you should know about or that people want you to address, or if someone just wants to talk to you directly or needs a ride on nomination day. Thank you, thank you, thank you. They're just two little words that you can never underestimate your team's importance, and it helps your team feel that like they matter and that they're actually here, and that you're building a relationship and it's not just a one-way street.
I think I go back to a former point that I made. I think a volunteer coordinator is so important to helping with all of the things that you listed out here: team cohesion, debriefing, listening to your volunteers as they come in. It's always important when people walk into an office or a space or a meeting that they know who to talk to. And so a lot of times, if you go into a campaign office, you might go in and you might have to awkwardly stand around and help you. But if it's clear to them who they're there to speak to, if they've got a volunteer coordinator who's dedicated to being the welcoming person, when new volunteers come in, it makes all of the difference on a campaign.
So this all leads us into our conversation with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nathan. Asma, before politics, what did your career and upbringing look like?
So I'm just a simple girl born and raised in Scarborough. And before politics, I was sort of, just run-of-the-mill, kind of not as interested or not as active on my own. So I come from a family where my dad is very politically involved. And from a young age, I would go to riding association meetings with him, or I would go to campaign events, but I didn't quite understand. I was just kind of going with my dad. And so it was just the thing that we did, where we'd go and hang out and then, go home after. So there was kind of inherent comfort that I had, with the world of politics, and sort of that volunteer culture and that kind of drive and passion for change. And that was something that was familiar and not something I took on my own until I was in university. And so in terms of my career before politics, I did at a time work, in the provincial government on the political side. But I actually was one of the people who went to grad school and then decided I didn't want to continue in grad school. Went and worked at Queen's Park for a few years, and then I went off to law school afterwards. And so my trajectory has been sort of grad school, do some politics full time, and then off to being a lawyer. And so now, as a lawyer, I do politics in the part time.
Thank you so much, and very, very long and established political history and career there. I'm so glad you shed light on that. What drove you to get involved in politics and political organizing in the first place? I know you talked a bit about your father trying to get you in there when you were younger, but what really drove you to get involved?
When I was in university, I think I was like a lot of university students where I was interested in the issues that were kind of prevalent around me. And so whether it was healthcare or tuition or, Canada's position in the world and the various policy objectives we had as, with our government at the time, I think there was a sort of an interest that came from education for me. So as I learned more about the world and the world that I lived in, I felt very strongly that, this doesn't seem right. And I wanted to change that. So I think there was always a drive to change things for the better. When I was in university, it seemed a lot simpler, where, politicians make decisions and decisions could be for good or bad. And for some reason, these politicians are making these decisions that are just bad. And the older I've become and the more experience I've gotten, I realize it's not so black and white. And so I think the drive to be involved in politics came from there. And I think the sort of political organizing has always been something that's just one step next to that passion. It's to get people more aware and engaged in the political process, because change can happen. You just need to have people who are like-minded, who are progressive, who feel like the status quo is not good enough, to take ownership over their government. And I think that's where the drive came from to get me involved in the first place.
Thank you for that. What are some key lessons for candidates from the various campaigns you've worked on? I know you've recently worked on a provincial leadership campaign, and you've worked on a couple of the individual riding levels.
I think there's a few things. So I think if you're a member of a team or if you're a candidate, I think there's a couple of things that are crucial for everyone. So, and I mentioned communication is a very strong one. The stronger you communicate with the team, the stronger you communicate, expectation. I think that helps sort of the longevity of any campaign. The other one is respect. I think that it is very important for candidates to set a tone of mutual respect on a campaign. And I think sometimes that is not communicated up front, and it should seem like a pretty obvious thing. But I find that in some of the campaigns I've worked on, in various ways, sometimes you find that kind of goes by the wayside. So I think certainly that would be an important one. And then the other thing that I would say is, campaigns and politics and being involved, all of that should be fun at the end of the day. So people should enjoy what they're doing. They should feel like they have some ownership in this process. So as a candidate, it's important for you to communicate that to everyone on your team so that everybody knows they're a part of something bigger, they're a part of a movement. And I think those campaigns that I've worked on, so Mitzi's campaign, we had a small team, but we had a mighty team. And we had a team that was passionate and eager and very, very, supportive of each other. And I think those types of characteristics don't come from nowhere. It takes work to create a team like that, and it takes work to have a sustainable and a long-lasting campaign that way.
Thank you for that. From your personal experience, what do you think is the biggest deterrent for underrepresented demographics seeking office?
I mean, I think in just anecdotally and speaking to people over the years, I know there's always and I don't know where this comes from, but there's a lot of times people say, I'd love to run, and the but, what comes after the but is different for different people. But a lot of times people don't think they're qualified enough, or they don't have the right experience, or they would be great at it, but maybe not now, maybe later. So I think for a lot of people, and this I think is more prevalent amongst sort of racialized groups, from amongst other underrepresented demographics, I think there is sort of a hesitancy. And I think that hesitancy comes from a lot of places. It comes from responsibility, it comes from the age and stage in life that people are. It comes from a lack of opportunity that they might have not had previously. And so I think that sort of hesitation is the biggest deterrent. I also think we have a system which doesn't necessarily make it easy for people to run or to participate in the political experience to their fullest, desire. But I do think those things are changing, and I think it's folks like you who kind of shed light and share some of this experience with others that are going to kind of take us to the next level.
Thank you for that. And kind of just building on that, what piece of advice do you have for those that may not think they have the political capital or experience necessary to make a difference in elected office?
I would say have an honest conversation with yourself. So what is holding you back from doing it? Is it, is it a specific experience? Is it some sort of, is it financial? What is it? So you need to make that list for yourself to determine why you are not seeking to run for office and it could be that you are at a specific, point in your career and you don't think it's a good time to do it. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Then the second question to ask is, what do I do to change whatever this deterrent is on my list? And you need to just sort of work on that. And unless you do that, we set goals for ourselves and we should work to make them attainable. So I think if there is a hesitancy or if there is a reason, it is very important to figure out what that reason is and to work towards sort of determining how you can get around that. And, a good way to do that is to actually speak to people who are involved in the process, speak to people who were candidates before, who have gone through this process. I've had women reach out to me who are interested in running, and sometimes their questions are, they have very valid concerns and questions, and there are honest conversations that they need to have with themselves, have with their families. But all of these things will lead them to hopefully taking the leap and running. But until you can sort of identify what your issues will be or might be, you're not going to take that next step.
Thank you. So just to wrap up our conversation here, so at the time of this recording, we're transitioning out of COVID into kind of a new setting. And there's been a couple of elections during the pandemic and conversations of elections after a certain threshold of vaccinations. So in your opinion, how have things changed and how are they going to change once we go back to normal? And what are some things that individuals seeking a nomination should consider after COVID?
I think the post-COVID, well, we're now at the point where Ontario is going to be entering into a second phase. And so now that we've got a population where vaccinations are, I believe, at about 60%, or most people have, or 60% of people have their first dose, and I think less than 20 have their second dose. We're starting to see a lot more comfort with people being able to even have the thought of gathering. I think 6 months ago, none of us could contemplate ever doing that. But now we're at a point where this is summer, the weather's nice outside, and you're starting to see a desire and a willingness of people to start to come together when it's safe and it's legal to do so. So I think that is going to change the way that we sort of enter into nominations and prepare for campaigns. I think what people should still take advantage of is, the virtual world. And so I attended a meeting for a riding association via Zoom. And what made it nice for me is I was actually able to make it to the meeting. If this was in the pre-COVID times, I would have had to drive somewhere. I would have been fighting traffic. I would have probably been, probably 45 minutes late and missed some very interesting discussion. So I think there are the benefits in this sort of post-COVID world, where we've become more, I think, comfortable with technology, and those who previously would have, you would have never thought you would get somebody to use Zoom because they absolutely hated their computer, is a lot more comfortable doing so. So I think we need to kind of marry the two. Use technology when it's efficient, when when we should be using it and when it makes sense to use it, but also use the excuse of nice weather and the ability to start to gather in small numbers to create the network of volunteers that you're going to need. So people have an opportunity to meet, to see each other. And I do think that this will be the new norm. It'll be sort of a hybrid model.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you for your shared insights and experiences today from the path that you've taken. Do you have any closing remarks for individuals that are thinking about seeking a nomination for elected office?
I think the one thing I can say is to take the step. There's lots of people that will talk about it and they'll talk about it and they'll think about it, but at some point you should just sort of bite the bullet and try. What do you have to lose? I think it's always important for a healthy democracy to have as many voices, represented. And I think we, as I guess, speaking about you guys as well, but as a community of political minded folks, I think helping and being there to mentor is just as important. So if you're somebody who has an interest in running, I think you should do it. You should seek out mentors amongst your networks. But overall, just go ahead and do it.
Thank you. Stay tuned for next module, having presence in your community, be seen and be heard.